Hello, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways of Greater Melbourne, the people of the Kulin Nation, and to recognise that ACME is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri people and that sovereignty was never ceded. I pay my respects and ACME's respects to their elders, both past and present, and warmly acknowledge any elders who have joined us here today and anyone in the room who has a connection to the world's oldest continuing culture. My name's Jeannie Maxwell. I'm a curator here at ACME, and it is my very great joy to be joined by some of the brilliant creative minds behind the recent video game, Stray Gods. David Gaider, Liam Esler, and Ben E. When I pitched this talk internally, I thought Stray Gods was such a perfect example of a truly multidisciplinary, thoughtful video game that drew on so many different mediums. There seemed like such an obvious link to screen and stage culture through musicals. And as we discussed the lineup of this talk, we decided, perhaps controversially, that we don't want to talk about musicals.
You have to understand, we've talked about musicals so much.
And as we planned and selected clips, we ended up getting, I think, a lot deeper into the development structure and unexpected sources of inspiration that shaped the look, feel, and writing of the game, which I think we'll have a lot of fun talking about. Could you please just play the intro video?
Grace, you know that you're lost now. You've been given powers you don't understand.
You say you didn't kill Calliope. You have 1 week to prove it. What do I do?
Start singing.
So sorry you had to be here for this. I'm in the dark too as you're hearing this. But someone is dead and I'm losing my head. Like the ghost said, this is my time, time to shine.
So Stray Gods is Summerfall's first game, the game that brought you together as a studio, but it's not the first time that Liam and David have worked together.
Sort of.
Yeah,
Sort of.
Professionally, yeah.
This game was kind of born out of a combination of technical requirement for your studio and creative interest. I thought maybe we could get into the technical side of things first. What drew you to kind of narrative game?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, David and I and our co-founder, Ellie, who's literally just gotten back from Japan, so couldn't join us, we initially talked about basically a 3-title strategy for Summerfall, and we knew that we wanted to build out tech for a series of games. We knew we wanted to work in the Unreal Engine, and we quickly realized that, as much as we love RPGs, we didn't want to start with an RPG because that was a truly insane endeavor. And so we opted to sort of pick one system that we felt we were very, very familiar with and very good at, and that was dialogue. And so as we first sat down to talk about sort of our first game, we knew that it would be dialogue-based.
Character-based.
Really. Character-based, but with dialogue systems is what I'm saying. From a technical
our
perspective.
crazy thing was that we imagined was that it would be easy to do the musical part because it would just be dialogue, branching dialogue with music, right?
Yeah.
It's that easy. But
What could be hard about both branching dialogue and music? That sounds really straightforward to me.
Well, you just put the clips in and it just plays like dialogue. It's not that hard. And so from a technical perspective, it was born of that need to sort of fulfill a broader pipeline. But then we were trying to work out what the X factor of a dialogue game could be, because in this day and age, you can't just make a dialogue game and have it sell and have it be interesting. So we had a lot of discussions about what that could be. And those discussions, I think very early on, we were like, well, what about a musical?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't usually, like you say, it was a long discussion. It was a very quick discussion. It was one discussion.
Well, no, we had multiple discussions about other options, but
the
whole
fact
time we were like,
it was going
it's
to
probably
be
going to be the musical.
branching musical was our very first discussion when we were talking about the X Factors. Look, the big thing for an indie game is just to get noticed. There are so many indie games that get made every year. You can make it. It's like a lot of people sort of take the Field of Dreams approach, right? If you build it, if you make this great game, people will just show up, and that doesn't really play out. So you need something that's a little bit extra. And so we're sitting down at the table, and Liam asked me, "So, you have any thoughts?" Then I had always wanted to work on a musical. I actually had pitched it as part of Dragon Age back when I was still working at BioWare. We did for the third game, Dragon Age Inquisition, we did a bit long musical cutscene in it where I got to work with the composer, and I really enjoyed that. And I was like, I went to my bosses and I was like, what if we did one that was interactive, that took place like in the dream realm, and there'd be a demon of revelry or something, and would get everybody sort of singing. We did it that way, and they were kind of leery, but the rest of the team immediately got very excited. So they got quite alarmed, and they said, "Oh well, we'll consider it if the game sells like, I don't know, 10 million copies." And I'm like, "Well, that's essentially a no." But it was always in the back of my mind as something that I had never gotten to explore. So when Liam asked that, I brought it up, and fully expecting that Liam would say, "Are you crazy? That's not viable or commercial." Yeah, I said, "Well, what about an interactive musical?" And to my surprise, Liam was like, "Yes."
Because am I right in thinking you studied musical theatre, Liam?
Yes, I did my degree in acting, not in video games, and did a lot of musical theatre growing up.
So I'm interested, and we'll obviously get more into the structure of Stray Gods as the talk continues, but you did this extended musical sequence for Dragon Age Inquisition, which we're about to show, and you still went into Stray Gods thinking, easy, don't even worry about it.
The one for Inquisition was not technically complicated because it was just a cutscene. Right, well, I mean, I say that, and somewhere there's a cinematic designer who's going to give me the look like...
Putting pins in a voodoo doll.
From a creative and like writing setup perspective, it was fairly simple because it was just linear, right? So it was an interesting endeavor in that I got to try something that was a little bit different. I've had a few opportunities throughout my career just to sort of leap into different narrative type waters, and I've always found it really gratifying to take on as a challenge, right? So it was interesting from that perspective, but it wasn't anything approaching the level of complexity as soon as you introduce branching inside of the song.
Could we please play clip 1, the Dragon Age clip?
Shadows fall and hope has fled. Still your heart, the dawn will come. The night is long and the path is dark. Look to the sky, for one day soon the dawn will come. The shepherd's lost and his home is far. Keep to the stars, the dawn will come. The night is long and the path is dark. Look to the sky, for one day soon the dawn will come. Bear your blade and raise it high. Stand your ground, the dawn will come. The night is long and the path is dark. Look to the sky, for one day soon the dawn will
There was a lot of questions on the team at the time, like why use a song? And I remember talking to them and saying, "Look, if we're having a moment where I need to indicate how far the player and this group has fallen, and what hope feels like to be kindled, I said I can have an hour worth of dialogue, 2 hours of dialogue, and still not reach the soul of the matter quite as quickly as you can in a 2-minute song. And that was the entire basis of my pitch to Liam, was that songs, music allows you to access the emotional core of a player, I think, or the viewer, way more quickly than hours of exposition.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I'm interested to know, working on this sequence, did you work with songwriters? Was it something that was written by
No,
the narrative
I
team?
wrote the lyrics myself. With Patrick Weeks and Karen Weeks, two writer and an editor that I worked with. The three of us worked together on the lyrics, but we were also working with the composer. So that was probably the first time I got to work very closely with a composer, and I really enjoyed that experience. Just how much different their viewpoint was, like the needs of the music, which I guess until that point, I mean, I enjoyed music, but I always had thought of as a sort of background thing. I never really considered the idea of it taking a more frontal position to the player.
And of course, you worked with the amazing Austin Wintory on Stray Gods. How did he kind of come into the fold? Because in another incredible moment of serendipity, I know that working on a musical game is a dream of his as well.
Yes. So we'd been looking thinking about like, oh God, we really need a talented composer who has some songwriting experience in order to deliver on such a complicated idea. And I think I was 2018, and I was at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, and it was the Friday of GDC, which for any game developer in the room who has done GDC before, you know how tiring it is. For everyone else, GDC is a 5-day conference. It's exhausting. It's usually filled with meetings and talks, and it was the Friday, and I was like, I'm done. I have nothing left to do. And a friend of mine who had a very difficult year and also happened to be pretty wealthy was like, can I take you to this incredibly expensive restaurant and we can just drink champagne and eat oysters and have like a wild lunch? And I was like, yes, you can do that. We can definitely do that. And so I was sitting half cut. I think I'd had like 5 or 6 glasses of champagne, and I get a Facebook message from a friend of mine saying, hey, I'm having lunch with Austin Wintory. I just mentioned your game, and he like lit up. He really wants to meet you. And I'm like looking at my watch being like, I fly out in like 3 hours.
And Austin, previously worked on Journey,
Yeah,
on
like
Assassin's Creed, like remarkable.
one of the most famous composers in video games.
Yeah.
Like he was the first games composer to be nominated for a Grammy. Like now there is a video game category, but he predated that. So I was like, I am so sorry. I have to go right now.
I have to wobble over to Austin
I have
Wintory
to,
right
I have
now.
to somehow like pull it together. And so I walked over to the GDC conference and met Austin. And within I think 5 or 10 minutes, we were incredibly just on the same page. The vibes were immaculate. And
He'd wanted to do something weirdly, had an idea to do something like this previous to us even bringing it up. Like he wanted to make something where the music was the game, but it couldn't quite get anybody on board with it. Couldn't quite form what that idea was. So yeah, when Liam talked to him, it was like, yes, that.
And I think I remember sending you a message like very quickly after being like, oh my God, I just met Austin Wintory and he's keen to work with us. This is
And I'm like,
wild.
what?
And he also mentioned that he had a friend of his that he'd been talking to for a long time about this, and that like maybe at some point like he might talk to him about it.
So at this point, you're going to make a narrative game. You're going to make a musical game that has a branching song structure. Do you have a sense of what genre it's going to hit?
Yes, I think by that point. Because we picked that I think it was like a couple weeks in. We played with a bunch of different ideas.
Yeah, that's right.
And I had been like, what about urban fantasy?
Yeah. Well, typical to how we work. I pitched a bunch of ideas and Liam said no to all of them.
Well, you got one in early, I guess.
I mean, the way we kind of work is I'll pitch them and then he'll take one or like suggest a twist on it or something addition to it. I'm like, yes, okay, I can do that. So the urban fantasy came into it and sort of were you the one that suggested the gods? Yeah, you were.
Maybe?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. You were talking American gods as a source of inspiration at first, and then because you mentioned that because you were the idea of the Muse came up.
That's right. Yeah.
But then the context of it being in urban fantasy was then you threw that like, why don't we do both of those ideas together? And I was like, yeah, gods in the modern world. Yeah, it's been done, but I probably got a few ideas I can kick around.
And did you ever? At this point, I mean, maybe this is just retrospective, but at this point was Ben working on the project already? Because to me, he seems like the most obvious fit for a like mythological urban fantasy musical project.
This was pre-Ben. Yeah. If I can barely imagine a time without Ben, but
and we wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
Bless you. Thank you so much.
He just celebrated 5 years at Summerfall, which gave me minor palpitations.
5 years. Oh God, dealing with me.
It's a lot of years, a lot of very good years, and the game developed visually and stylistically so much in that time. With the team's permission, I have sourced a tiny clip of a very early 3D demo of the game, which looks pretty drastically different in terms of UI and in terms of art style. And I wonder if we could just play that now, clip 2.
Looking for exactly?
A key to a magic gateway that leads into Hades.
Hades as in the land of the dead Hades?
Yeah, that's the one. It's in the basement, so I'm told. That's one of Persephone's men. He might have a key on him.
I distract him while you pick his pocket.
Is that... Yeah, I think that's Pan over in the booth.
Oh, he smells weird.
Well, he is kind of a goat, Freddy.
That might be an office in the back.
What, you want me to kick in the door? Well, looks like Apollo's here.
That dude's Apollo?
Well, let's get a move on.
Back when Freddy was a boy.
I know. I was going to say, I'm very keen to dive into art, but I want to talk first about Freddy. Key character, my favorite character. When did that shift happen?
Well, Freddy was always a character that had sort of an unrequited crush on Grace. But then as we went into it a little bit more, it felt a little bit like dated to have a boy pining after Grace, and I wanted another female romance. So then I don't remember when it happened, but it floated the idea of changing him to a female character. Liam wanted to change the name. And I said, you know what, maybe we could just keep it Freddy. And he hated that idea. So that solidified in my mind, okay, she must be named Freddy. But yeah, it happened early enough that it's hard for me to think back, oh, right, that is right. Yeah, it wasn't for very long.
I like that you moved away from a sort of Xander Buffy dynamic to more of a like Chloe Max Life is Strange dynamic. I think it works really well. Ben, you were delivered the most exciting, most terrifying task, which is just like make it look good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You'll be working with David Gaider and Austin Winter, just make it look really good and be up to par. And I was like, sure, I can do that.
How quickly did you decide on bisexual lighting? Because I see that
very
pretty,
quickly.
pretty consistently throughout the game.
Yeah, very quickly, very quickly. I think trying to think of what makes something like urban fantasy was just like trying to make something feel magical and very powerful, and also a bit very aesthetic. You know what I mean? And yeah, red and blue just hit that.
Well, we talked about that early. It was having a vibrant sense of color, because I think there was a lot of titles we were seeing where they kind of embraced realism, but realism came in the forms of like grays and browns.
Brown, yeah.
So we slowly can we have a distinctive color palette. So if somebody sees a screenshot from the game, it's like, oh, that's from Stray Gods, right? And so Ben, I think in like a day, you whipped up here's sort of a series of color palettes we could use for different parts, and it was like, oh yeah, that.
Yeah.
And I think like the evolution of the project, because originally when we first talked to Ben, it was like very 2D. Like the plan was basically a visual novel with some like musical elements, and instead of like being fully animated, the characters would just like kind of slide onto the screen and slide off when they're singing. So it was illustrative. And so we brought on Ben because we loved his use of color and his illustrations. And then we took a hard left turn and we're like, okay.
Suddenly it's 3D.
We had all these publishers telling us like, well, if you want to create something of this scope, it has to be 3D. We can't sell like a 2D game like this. And so we're like, okay. And so then Ben had the ultimate challenge of translating his style into 3D. And then when publishers were like, actually, that's too risky now, that the budget's too high, we're like, what? You asked us to do this.
We did this 3D thing because
Just for you. And then Ben had to then learn how to translate into yet another style.
Yeah, we just kept evolving, just kept changing.
So much evolution.
I mean, but we didn't go back to the original, because when he mentioned like the characters. A lot of games do that, especially in visual novel style. When you talk to somebody, it has like a separate. They have a separate picture that sort of appears on the screen, and then you have your dialogue in a window next to them. But turning it into sort of a graphic novel that sort of simulated the use of camera with like a 3D background, that wasn't anywhere on our radar originally. But getting to this style sort of to add a sense of life, that was the real artistic journey after we abandoned the 3D version.
Yeah, I think the 3D version really showed us the power of having a cinematic feel to it, and how having it be in there in the action and really feeling the room and the environment and the atmosphere was really important. And I think that's something that Liam was like, we're keeping that somehow. We're gonna do it, So.
Yeah, I'm interested, when you were thinking about those design features that might be more sort of typical visual novel versus graphic novel, like little character cards. Did you ever did you shed those quite quickly, or did you keep them for time?
That's a good question.
I think it was pretty quick. Like, I think we knew that once we were done with the 3D demo,
we sat down and discussed our options.
Yeah.
Came up with like, oh, let's try this. You put together a quick prototype of that, as I recall. You did one conversation, which was the very beginning of the Grace Persephone challenge song? Question mark, or was it the Minotaur?
I think it was the Minotaur.
I think it was the Minotaur.
Yeah, okay. Grace versus the Minotaur, right. As a sort of, here's what this might look like.
Yeah.
And we tweaked it a little bit after that, but that was basically it. The first version of like, yes, let's do that. Because I think, there was some discussion, and it was a sort of a measure twice, cut once situation where we did a lot of talking and navel gazing for a bit to figure it out. But then once we picked our path, we just ran.
We are going to get to that little Minotaur prototype and the accompanying mysterious lost song. But first, I do want to talk a little bit more about your kind of experience of developing the game's visual style. As much as you are such a proficient and incredible 2D artist, I interview people quite often. I don't like fan out super often. When I found out that Ben had drawn Magic the Gathering cards, I lost my mind. And I wonder, approaching what is, a huge cast of characters, but also a huge range of environments, some more sort of set-like, some more naturalistic. What was your process of developing a kind of style that could be both really diverse while also feeling holistic?
Yeah, so it just kept coming back to this idea. So for a lot of the art direction that I had for this game, I kept going back to this like idea in my head where it's just like a marble statue illuminated by neon lights. And that was the feeling that evokes, having, something super ancient interact with something super modern and grungy and dark kind of thing, and really colorful, was really interesting and fascinating to me. And I kind of used that to make most of, if not all, the decisions for Stray Gods, and where that sort of went. So it was always going to be like dark in some way. Utilizing the comic book style meant that we were allowed to use like ink fills and blacks and stuff like that to really like carve out, really powerful shapes and stuff like that. And when it came to the environments and making sure that they felt true to the emotion of the scene that they belonged in, while also staying true to the god of which like it was the domain of, you know what I mean?
And the tone for the game, like the narrative tones. We spoke a lot about the themes we were exploring, and they were. I mean, I was never going to write something that belonged in the Disney catalog. We went pretty dark. I like to combine like the dark, serious stuff with a little bit of levity and self-awareness. But we walked through that with Ben a lot, and so we needed something that was wasn't going to run contradictory to the dark tone, right? But could still embrace color without seeming light and airy.
Well, I suppose I'm going off topic a little, but I want to. One of the things that I am also kind of consistently noticing, talking to you more about development, is that I think probably a risk that you ran doing a musical game is that it could be it could get maudlin, it could get too dark, too emotional. And I see like pretty consistent efforts to make sure that like it's noir but fun. It's not gritty. Sad. It's gritty, exciting.
Yeah, there was a pretty early on, I think, like reading the early scripts and stuff, I had this idea that it was kind of, we were leaning really deep into the noir mystery of it all, and I kind of had like a Twin Peaks aesthetic in my head of like, Calliope and Grace and uncovering the mystery and stuff. And I think there were some times where you had to like pull me back. You're like, that's going too dark. We're getting too gritty into it. Yeah.
I think that tone was established pretty early as well, because one of those strong influences was Buffy Once More with Feeling. And like that episode and the way that it manages grief and sadness and loss and incredible levity and having those things is always like a hallmark of
the use
Dave's
of
work.
the musical pieces as catharsis.
Yeah.
For these characters to resolve sometimes very serious issues. Yeah, that I think was a very strong early inspiration, and I think even the tone that Buffy used, which was sort of disarming the darkness of it through the use of self-awareness. So that was something I wanted to try and see if I could watch. I mean, there were some people I always acknowledge this, like there's some people who are going to approach this and they're expecting a Disney musical. And they're never going to get that.
We've had a number of people who went to the game and were like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah. But nor did I want to write something that was all just people like angsting and it's constantly drowning in their sorrows and singing about it. Because I think that would just be unbearable.
I mean, speaking of that combination of like not no angst, of like some angst, but also like brightness. And color. Ben, I remember you saying that K-pop, there were some K-pop music videos that were kind of a eureka moment for you in terms of the visual style of the game as well.
Yeah, for Song Worlds, it was very interesting because we had the question of like, what are we going to visually show in Buffy? Once more with feeling, it was kind of just like they are in the world, just having a little dance and sing. But we had this opportunity to use the visuals to, first of all, visually distinct it from this is happening in the real world to an extreme version of everyone's feelings, everyone, state of being. And it also represented an opportunity to really push the emotion of everything. And boy, do we go hard on those emotions, And so, I was trying to find some sort of inspiration, like what can we look, obviously, no one has really done this before, which is why we're so crazy. And so it was kind of like trying to find sources that weren't other video games, because there weren't many. We found K-pop music videos.
You were looking for music videos first.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you showed up one day at work and you were like, K-pop.
And we were like, what?
Yeah.
K-pop's the future.
Yeah. And then there was a couple of songs specifically. You were like, there's a music video that they did where they kind of are jumping between these song worlds in the video. And you were very excited. Even, to be honest, even once you showed us the video, we were like, you're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. If that says something to you, then great.
So something I notice immediately that I see in Stray Gods is the use of colour to indicate a switch between world and song world. Sorry to disagree with you, David.
Looking at that, it makes more sense to me now than it did when you
crazy. I'm not crazy, David.
No, it's so funny watching that. It just cuts back to all those times in the office where I would just be like headphones in, watching K-pop videos with like the most serious face on, trying to like deconstruct everything that's going on. Song worlds were hugely influenced by K-pop because like one of the things that I noted was that you switch through multiple worlds or rooms without giving it a second thought, It's kind of just like, oh, okay, whatever. And so it was also a means for everyone to have their own distinguished stories or narratives or experiences that they're going through. Some people having a real solemn moment in a dark room with all these like lights being lit up of the phones simulating stars or something like that, right? And then someone else is just like stoically looking at a fireplace where everything's in ruin, And the visual distinctiveness and the feeling of them are different, and just being able to swap through all of them was so interesting to me, especially for in our songs where it would have like a structural, chronological arc essentially. Being able to utilize multiple song worlds as a means to tell different parts of this story of the song, right? And just being like, okay, in this world, for example, are we allowed to talk about a little bit of spoilers and stuff? Okay, hell yeah.
I think there are probably few people in the room who've played the game, I imagine.
You played the game? In like Apollo's song, very early on, it would be him telling the story of his relationship with Calliope, and that we decided to use shadow puppets kind of thing, a light swinging back and forth, and that would show like different silhouettes and shadows that would tell the story, and it'd be like a recollection. And then in the next scene, Grace kicks in and starts being like, well, hold on, what? Did you do it? Did you kill Calliope? And it suddenly becomes more interrogating. And obviously Apollo in his guilt and in his sadness is just like, yes, I did it. Oh my God, But he didn't confess or anything. But he's still saying like how he's feeling about it, and he feels guilty about it. And so we had that being in an interrogation room where it's like, surrounded in darkness, the one projector light shining on the face of Calliope, a very like missing person sort of image, and he's sort of just like confronted with this, his face, directly at it, and he sort of has just like confess his feelings about it, and it's just like, watching the fake love was a very breaking it down into like each little room has its own narrative going on, and you can switch between them, and it's also like a the audience expectation of having seen many music videos. It was kind of a risk, but it was like, I feel like if having everyone seen enough music videos, once it happens in Stray Gods, you're kind of along for the ride immediately. It's kind of like a learned thing.
You're not going to sit there and question.
But like, wait a minute, where are they now?
Yeah.
That's not possible.
How does her power work exactly?
Because that absolutely could have been the case. Like, you could have done that and it could have been a really jarring moment. But I think you did an excellent job of particularly handling the transitions.
Yeah, that's also thanks to the wonderful cinematics team and the storyboard team, storyboard artists.
Let's shout them out by name.
Yeah, okay. We got Sasha Much, we got Lily Bagalis Jackson, we've got Olivia Ong, we've got Ethan Taylor. We've got hold on. Come on. I'm bad with words. Sometimes comes, but I know the name.
That's okay.
I know the names.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. You did great.
Hi, Harry.
Harry! I was like, Alex, wrong.
It's the new hair.
It's the new hair. You look great, by the way.
It's great hair. So just stepping back a little bit, you mentioned that this like Minotaur prototype was the moment where you feel like you really nailed the song world style in particular. Is that right? Or
Yeah.
the art direction more broadly?
Well, it was our first sort of exploration into song worlds and what it could mean as a break from reality. And so that was where we really played it up. As well as that, that was around the time when we decided we were definitely going to do 2D. So realizing
We were going to have dancing.
we were going to have dancing.
So
yeah,
let's have movement and let's explore, like, if we're not, someplace like Once More with Feeling is on television, they can't do massive set changes with a lot of money. Let's lean into the fact that we're using animation at least and do something that brings it to life.
Let's watch that little animatic now. It's just clip 4.
Okay, you're not lost. You're not lost. Everything's fine. Everything is not fine.
What wayward soul blunders in my shadows?
Oh, are these your shadows? I'm just passing through. Total accident. Bad accident.
Now who's this come into my lair delightfully unaware?
So I can see some really kind of archetypal Stray Gods things going on here. The slide onto screen, there's no character cards, that really bright contrasting colour. Were there other things that you think kind of fell into place for the team when you saw this?
Yeah, well, the again, like using a space that didn't feel real, having the chains appear into this starkly red room, being like that's not possible, but it still like evoked the feeling, was definitely like hit the nail on the head.
This is the one I was talking about where you showed us, this is what I'm thinking, and we looked at that and we're like, yeah, more of that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that this really cemented was the expressiveness of the characters. And I remember you doing an expression sheet for, early Grace for this. And that became a pretty, like, even though the art style evolved, like, that expressiveness was really critical to the sort of the fundamental nature of the art direction for the game.
Exactly, especially because, like, David's wheelhouse is characters and stuff, and, and just being able to faithfully represent them was really important. And I think we did okay.
We did okay. To be clear, at this point, we thought we were going to illustrate the entire game.
Yeah, I was twisted.
We hadn't gotten to 3D backgrounds yet.
No.
We thought that everything was going to be a bespoke picture. And a shout out, by the way, to the voice of Grace, Allegra Clark, who eventually played Hecate in the final game, but she was helping us a lot during the initial construction of the game, and helping with the let us match up actual professional style voiceover to what we were doing. 'Cause it is painful to hear devs doing our own VO.
And you will later in this talk. Something else there are two things that I'm interested in here. We start to get a sense more of the UI closer to how it appeared in the final game. I'm really interested in that process because I know that both accessibility and approachability to a general audience were really important to you from a design perspective.
Yeah, 100%. I think the song system in Stray Gods went through a number of iterations, and it took a long time to kind of get to the point where we were like, we don't need a system.
Yeah, I started off, I was certain I needed some kind of, the songs are the center of the game. They're the boss battles. I need some sort of mechanic involved. But what we kept, every time I would put something in, because we had a,
like in the 3D demo, it was like there was a point system.
Yeah, we call it the flow system, right? You would build up flow, both the choices you made, and then when you got to the final decision, the decisions, the various options would cost flow. So did you build up enough to make that decision? Great. And it sounded great in theory, but what we found was that when people actually sat down and played, as soon as they realized there was a mechanic, they were immediately their brain went to, oh, how do I build up flow?
How do I win?
How do I win at this song? And they stopped paying attention to the story of the song. So we did a few iterations where we pared back the mechanics and kind of made them more, try to make them more like self-explanatory, or even trying to go like, hey, don't worry, you'll get to the end and you'll have enough flow. Don't worry about getting it. This is just the type of flow will determine the type of option you get. Well, then they immediately went to, okay, I'm trying to get to this ending. How do I reverse engineer that with the decisions? And it wasn't the kind of play experience we wanted for the player. So ultimately, we made the decision to just strip out basically all the mechanics from the songs and let people just play it and do as they wished. And that really hurt my game designer soul for a bit. But then when I watched the first few people actually play, and they played it exactly like I wanted them to play it, just in the moment, I was like, all right, yeah, that's the right thing to do.
Because I think one of those evolutions too came relatively late. Where I say relatively late, I mean like 3 years in maybe, where we'd written a couple of the what would become the final songs. There were early iterations of them, and what happened was you needed to make a certain amount of a certain kind of trait decision in order to get that trait ending. And we still found that players were like metagaming in order, like they weren't experiencing it. They were like, I need to make 3 clever options in order to get X. And so we ended up stripping it out. And I think there's actually still a few awkward moments at the end of some of the songs where it's like
only the final song got made with us knowing what the final system would be.
Yeah.
Some of the remnant, there's a bit of legacy stuff in the earlier songs that's like, well, why is it structured like that? Well, because that's how we had it work. But eventually, yeah, when we made that final pull of the last mechanic, and I was like, I just had to explain to myself, like, well, but what if I made all red choices? And it's very aggressive grace, and we get to the very end, and it's okay for the player to suddenly take the compassionate option? And I'd sit there and think, well, okay, Dave, stop being controlling DM for a moment. If it makes sense to the player, let them pick it. If it doesn't make sense to them, they're not going to pick it. Oh, as soon as I thought like that, like, oh, if it makes sense to the player, let them do it. And if they, then that will make sense. It's about them building their narrative.
Yeah.
And once I let go of that, that level of control, it actually ended up being the kind of story-making, song-making game that we wanted it to be.
And then Austin somehow made it work, like compositionally.
You all made it work like incredibly well. I thought maybe as a kind of, we just saw the little beginning of a Minotaur song that changed tone quite significantly, that character.
Was that already Troy?
Yeah, so that was that. The Minotaur there was Troy Baker, pitched down a little bit.
Before he was our VO director.
Before he was our VO director, or even like Apollo. But the sort of, I had a point and it's gone. That's great.
Well, I thought we would move. We're going to skip clip 5 and move straight to clip 6, which is Hecate and Asterion, the Minotaur we actually see in the film, in the game. Long day. And then have a look at the actual song graph and structure, and maybe you can talk us through what is going on there.
I'm not great at words. I'm more of a dancer.
Just speak from the heart. Be honest. You can do it.
You cast a spell on me. Not literally, obviously. But I feel in summary, you and me are meant to be. 'Cause you put a hex on me. You didn't do it to me directly. I'm not blaming you specifically, just that metaphorically. Shit, can someone help me?
It's okay. Okay, what are some of the things you love about her?
Hecate, with you there's so much to love. Oh, I'm not saying you're fat.
Did not just say that.
Okay, hold on.
Tell her something she doesn't know about herself.
Oh, Katie, to me, you know you enrapture
Ooh, good word.
is your pallid skin. Your lips are so thin. Your love of books.
Asterian, I have but one thought. Why is it that you seem so distraught? Are you saying you're in love with me? You couldn't possibly. Really?
Oh, you're doing great. Give it another go.
You've cast a spell on me. It's a feeling that's killing me. But let's say categorically, oh, Katie, it's just you and me.
A significantly less terrifying Minotaur than you were originally
Funnily
planning.
enough, that's the one song that gets us closest to Disney.
That's true. That was rude of me. Can we talk through kick-ass, clever, and charming as these three options? Sorry to show you're working out on a big
Would
screen.
you like to give this a go, Mr. Gaider, sir?
Okay, so
Here, maybe
we can break down dialogue into three types of tones. That's maybe making it a bit more mechanical than it is actually the way we work. But there is sort of when you're supplying options for in regular dialogue for a character, you're falling into three sort of general categories. One that's going to be tougher, more aggressive. One that is going to be the good guy. And one that is like the clever, sometimes smart ass. Superman, Batman, Spider-Man. That's basically how we break it down. And when I was talking through how we were going to structure the songs with Austin, this is before we even had the lyricist come on, I was like, well, if it's working kind of like dialogue, we kind of need the player to be able to pull it in the same kind of direction to make it's their grace, or this is how they're reacting to the moment, whether they're angry about it or, it's situationally different, right? Because Kick-Ass, for instance, isn't always going to be angry. Sometimes sometimes it's aggressive. Sometimes it's boldness. Sometimes it's righteousness. But so the flavor is always situational. But I said we need to be able to let the player pull it in each different direction. Now the challenge that Austin had was like, okay, he can imagine like these three different paths: the red path, green path, blue path. No problem. It's when we're moving from one to another, how to do the kind of transitions, and where he said, "Oh, well, you're branching it into 3, but really, I need to branch it into 9."
Well, I think that was Tripod, because when Tripod came in, because
First it was changing
it was
because
just
we need to go from green to blue. So when we do have a branch of 3 options, we need red, blue to red, green to red.
It was
green to green,
it was just going to
green
go
to
out
blue,
and
green
out
to red.
and out.
Yes. Then it was the lyricist came on and they were like, "Hey, that's not enough branching." I'm like, "It is enough branching." But they were like, "No, you see, you have to maintain a certain coherence in it being a song. It's not just dialogue. if we start off with at the very top. You could see we break it down into the 3 hooks. A lyrical hook based on your very first choice in the song, like which one is it for this one? Try complimenting it. No, that's not the hook. Anyway, it establishes a hook right off the bat, so that what we do then is we maintain that hook every time we go back to the chorus in the song, and so that we not only are branching into 9 because we are doing we have to account for the player moving between tones. We're actually branching into 27 because we also have to maintain the 3 different hooks no matter where you are in the song. So it can get quite complex. This isn't actually the full, like, how it branches on the musical side. This is just on the lyrical side, maintaining like I'd sit down with the lyricists each time and talk about how we had much like that was the one thing I brought, because I discovered very quickly I can't write music to save my life. But I do have a long history with how to branch dialogue and maintain a coherence. Like everything has a story and an informational flow that needs to be maintained. I'm like, we can branch and go off, but we need to make sure that we eventually get to the ending and the player has enough information that they've reached, no matter where they went in the song, to inform that final decision. So that's why we ended up doing this. It would occasionally bottleneck to sort of bring it back in, having little moments that moved it forward. And it was a constant sort of push and pull between me and the lyricists, them wanting it to be more songy and me wanting to be more branchy. And that's how we ended up at this.
I know we were talking just before the panel about how much you and Liam both value character consistency and consistent character voice. You gave players, as you were just saying, a lot of control over the choices they made really consistently throughout. So I imagine maintaining a kind of consistent tone for Grace so that Kick-Ass is noticeably different from Charming, but not so different that you're like, who is she? And I wonder how
we had to sit down with Laura as well to talk about what are the 3 flavors of Grace. That this is all one character, so that we're not being schizophrenic. Like no matter suddenly she's kind of crazy. Now she's nice. No, it all is 3 different expressions of the same character, and that had to apply both within the regular writing, but also in the song. Austin talks a lot about how he developed a musical language with each of the different tones, right? That no matter which song you're in, you will hear certain elements that are key into that particular tone. Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh no, not at all. I was about to say, talk to me about that, and then you did. I'm interested, I suppose, in hearing. You said, like, obviously this took a lot of iteration and the song system itself wasn't developed until you were writing the final songs. Did you come up against any surprising blocks while you were sort of not necessarily retrofitting, but adapting songs that you'd written previously to this new song system?
Well, there was the change in the mechanics that happened a lot, like the having to go back. And the lyricists had different ideas over how we need to structure that, and that's part of how you work. It's we got to try to come to something together. But it's like when we had to go revisit the earlier songs, they were like, "Wow, would it be nice if we didn't have this kind of restriction back when we did this the first time?" And I'm like, "Yes, settle down."
Because as much as it is a character-driven game, it's also a noir mystery.
Yeah.
You really have to get a lot of very specific information across to the player.
Yeah, I mean, there was some confusion initially over how much of the game was in song and how much was in dialogue. I think both Austin and Larissa had this idea that most of the game was just in song, and they were like a few minutes of dialogue in between songs. And I was like, I don't know where you got that idea. There's a whole 50-page document right here. Didn't you read the entire thing? No, but I mean. That was the difficult part overall, was that we had nothing to point at and say, hey, it's like that. So we had they were obviously looking to what a stage musical would be, a 2-hour, whatever, something that you would see on Broadway. That's how we're thinking of this. There's no other, and I can't fault them for that because there's no existing way to do it. The reason we didn't figure out how to properly approach 3 different people with different viewpoints, ways of working on this type of material, the way we didn't really figure it out until near the end is because we had no one to ask, no one to go to for advice. Like, well, how do you properly put together a branching musical number that works as a song, yet also functions as branching dialogue and gets us narratively to the point where we can make 3 distinct choices? Thoughts? No, nobody could tell us. So we kind of felt it out, and we did it with varying, I think varying levels of success. And then we kind of had figured out, like, okay, we were hitting the finale song at the very end, and we reached points like, you know what, we clearly need to walk through it like almost like a 3-legged race. 3 of us, we just need to take all the steps together. Nobody going off to work on their own for a while. Let's just sit down, have these 3-hour-long meetings where we just talk through each section of the song from a high-level standpoint, get through all the entire thing like we've sketched it out, and then the lyricist can go off and work on it. And we're like, that went so well. We're like, if only I'd known that back when we'd started, had this laid down, it would have been so.
I mean, that
much
happens
easier.
on every project,
Yeah,
right?
right,
Where
yeah.
you get to the end of the project, you're like, oh, we finally worked out how to make the game. Oh, and we're shipping.
I was going to say, like, so much about this game required such close creative collaboration. I wonder how you managed communication between so many different like specialists and experts with like quite niche knowledge who maybe wouldn't be used to working together or speaking each other's language.
I think it was tough. Like there were times where like we really violently disagreed on some things, and I think the hard part was then sort of finding this space to step out of being in the frustrated situation and like listening to like what is actually moving us forward here, like what is going to be useful. And I think like I remember there was one point where we got a bunch of feedback from playtesters and also from the lyricists and a bunch of other people and game developers, and one of the bits of feedback was that there wasn't enough song, and that Grace wasn't present, like that Grace's didn't have an arc in the story. And we ended up going through and adding a lot of the shorter songs at that point, because we wanted to make sure the player didn't go like more than 40 minutes basically without hitting some kind of song. And I think that's where like I ended up writing the like a drift reprise and then all of the romance reprises and old wounds and if
we had
it was like just a bunch,
a 3/4 moment in the project where I had to rewrite almost the entire story. We did the reset. I mean, and it's good. You want to have that moment when you're doing a game where you don't get so entrenched and like, well, you bring up a lot of good points, but we're too far. You want to have that moment to stop, and that's both from the mechanical perspective, it's from the art perspective, it's from the narrative and tones perspective. I never want to get so, this is the story I'm making that, we would sit down with the team and we would do these read throughs, and people would bring up concerns over, sometimes it was about how characters are portrayed or things that people might be sensitive about. And I never want to be so entrenched in what I'm doing that I don't stop and think, okay, I need to back up a little bit, think about this, take it in. And I mean, not necessarily do everything that everyone says, but think about why they're saying it, what part of that makes sense, and what I could do to sort of address that, whether it would actually address that. So I think you can, one thing that game devs do a lot, they get into like a little tailspin towards the end where they're just questioning everything and nothing makes sense ever, and you want to avoid that. But you never want to get closed off to feedback. So we had some really good moments, both with the lyricist, with Austin, with the rest of the team, where we stopped and considered what we were doing.
I know you worked with the amazing musician Montaigne as a lyricist. Was she the only lyricist? Were they, the only lyricist that you worked with?
So we worked with Tripod.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So Tripod did most of the main songs, and then Montaigne wrote the 4 primary love songs.
Adrift,
and co-wrote Adrift with us.
Yeah.
I wrote a bunch of the other ones. You wrote, I think, Apollo's Reprise and one of the other ones. I can't remember which one. I feel like
Remember Persephone? No, you did Persephone.
I did Persephone. That was the one that I just wrote in a tram.
I was doing a lot of editing.
Wow, that's a real banger to just like.
Oh,
type out in
I
a
was on the.
tram.
It was the most bizarre thing. I was just on the tram to work and fully formed, like a huge chunk of Persephone's love song reprise.
I found I was
in
much
my
better
head.
at coming into the songs after someone had done the first
Yeah.
draft, and then modifying it. Like the Hecate Minotaur song, I think I rewrote almost all of Hecate to sort of fit what I felt her voice was. But if you had sat me down to do that in the first draft, like to construct the song like that, no. I think I've slowly gotten there, like having more of a command of lyrical structure. But it is funny, considering that I've also worked on novels and comic books. I should have realized a long time ago that just because, yes, it also involves writing, but it is a completely different medium, Dave. It's a completely different skill set. You can't just run in there saying, I'll clearly be instantly good at this. No, it is something that you have to get there. And that's something that both Tripod and Montaigne showed, is that there is a command of lyricism, a way to make, not only to convey these words in a way that is understandable to the player, but that is evocative. Without going with simple rhyming structures that feel kind of belabored. You know what I mean?
And also, writing dialogue in song. Like, that's the easiest thing, right? Is just to put dialogue to music.
Yeah.
And instead having to be like, okay, if you take this step back, what is the character feeling? What is the undercurrent? What is the metaphor we're using? How are we going to do that?
But
And
not
that's,
to get too so songy.
Yes.
That suddenly the player, like, it's such a metaphor now that the player doesn't understand the information. That was a constant battle.
Oh, God.
Like, okay, I know you've made this whole verse about a flower. Okay, but we're talking about a murder. And a player may be listening to this part of the song and may think, oh, this is such a pretty song, but I need to talk about the murder. So that was a constant struggle.
So going back to that, I'd really love to revisit the songwriting process and then to move into the recording process, because I think that's really interesting too. So you have these meetings that are about structure, the information that needs to be conveyed, how things branch. Who exactly is in those meetings?
Well, when we first, like I said, we had to struggle a lot until we found out the way to do it. But initially, the way we thought it would work is I would do the initial waterfall, like the actual chart, where I would, instead of writing the actual lyrics, I would say, this is what I need each moment to feel like and convey. And this is what the choices will be. So we're talking about the overall narrative structure, as opposed to once Austin and the lyricist got involved, they got more complicated because they needed it to also branch musically. But first, it was the narrative structure. So I would give that to them, and they would look at it and go, okay. So they would come back with sort of a first draft. We would go back and forth a bit as they pitched ideas for, okay, how about this? A sort of a tone for the song. Maybe they would do the first couple of verses, and I'd be like, and we would talk about that. Or like what are the lyrical hooks we're going to use. Go back and forth a bit. And then at some point, sometimes before I was ready, honestly, because we were just so busy, but at some point they would just say, okay, I think we can get it. And they would go off and they would work on it sometimes for way too long. And I'd be like, so you've been working on that song for a little while. Is it long? And they're like, yeah, it's almost done. And you're like, oh my God, it's a whole song. Or sometimes it would be like, oh, that's you haven't. They're like, yeah, we're really struggling. There were a couple songs that they really.
Yeah, I think Apollo got rewritten from scratch twice.
3 times.
We
almost cut it entirely. In fact, because they were struggling so much with it. And then Jan came along.
Simon Holt came
finally
in.
Finally, sort of a Hail Mary came in and said, well, I don't know. What about this? It's way simpler than the structure I'd first put forward. He's like, what about this? It's really simple, but and I listened and was like, oh, that's really good. I think he got pitched on a Friday, and I went home, and it was like brainwormy, sort of stuck in my head. I'm in the shower, and I was kind of singing it already, and I'm like, no, I think that will actually work nicely.
I'm interested to know were there any particular lines or moments that you really fought to keep? Either it's a beautiful metaphorical flower, or no, we're talking about murder now.
We definitely had arguments over lines.
Yeah. So, like so many. I mean, it was a situation where we would focus almost exclusively on this one line. Is really is it that important on the whole?
No.
No, but I, now that you ask, I'm like I can't.
I know that there are some that I'm very happy made it through the process, but I don't think there are any that I'm like, hey, this particular phrasing it was more like when we had to go back and reconceptualize parts of songs to ensure that they were consistent with characters.
Yeah.
Like I think that was probably more the biggest thing, was making sure that because we had, I guess 5-6 people like writing stuff between lyrics and dialogue and everything and music, making that consistent across all of them.
They didn't really have a lot of
hard.
insight into the dialogue portion of the game.
Yeah.
So often what I would have to do is go in afterwards and sort of file off some of the edges to make sure that the character that existed in the dialogue was the same character that existed in the song. So there was a bit of that, and then there was sometimes working with tone, especially if there was a humorous moment in a song. Does that match the kind of feel we want from the overall game? And then the Aphrodite song was a big instance of this is a potentially really dark and serious moment. I don't want to approach the idea of suicide with flippancy, right? Or with an easy answer. So it was a lot of consideration on that level. But I mean, there was never a point when the lyricists or Austin weren't sort of on board with what we were doing. Like there would be initially some argument, perhaps. They would have their idea, and I generally, if I explained, like, this is what I need, the tone, this is what I need. Often when I'm giving direction, I'm saying, this is the feeling I need from this. So whatever you need to do to get there is fine, but we do need to get there.
That's actually something I've heard a lot, both from composers and from game devs about music in games, is they kind of turned a corner when they stopped trying to use technical language with each other and started using emotion language. Yeah. Like, this is how I need it to feel more XYZ, or rather than...
I definitely think there was a problem early on, because like both Ellie and I are pretty literate in music terminology, and you're not as literate. And so those early meetings with Austin, like I remember you would just look at us and be like, what are you talking about?
If I heard the word leitmotif one more time.
Speaking of your musical skills, I wonder if we could talk through... Oh, we're playing the scratch recording. But first, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Adrift, because it seems like, of course, the most perfect moment to end on. You said that was a co-written song with Montaigne. How did that begin? Not not hugely branchy?
No, like it was one of the songs
because
that...
whenever I say something about game design, like say
that
seems simple about like to a game dev, I'm like, just take me out back. I'm so sorry. I never want to do that.
Like Adrift, we knew that Adrift was the most important song of the game.
Yeah.
And it was the song that we probably spent the most time on overall, like end to end.
The current version appeared when we did the rewrite.
Yes. So
and you were the one who told me, well, musicals often start with, we need to know where the main character is, where they're starting their...
We need the I Want song.
I Want song. So as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, okay, I get what we're going for here. And so we did a version of a song, and we just like... But we did recognize this needs to be looked at by somebody who with more music.
I think it was one of the ones that... because there are lots of ways you can co-write a song with a composer in particular. You can start with the lyrics, you can start with the music, you can have a meeting and do both. This was one where I think I started with a bunch of lyrics and I sent them to Austin, and he was like, okay, I think I have some musical ideas. And he actually, the like a boat lost at sea. Like that little thing he had from the beginning. Like I think literally in one of the first meetings, he like just plonked that out on the piano. And I think very early he knew that was Grace's theme. And so I was like, well, okay, well, I'll throw some stuff in there. And then he sent back a couple of versions. We went back and forth, and it never got to a place where we were happy with it. Like there were lines we really liked.
Yes.
There were like concepts we really liked. We really liked, I think Austin was the one who came up with it, like, okay, let's play with the naval navigation metaphor, like this like lost at sea idea. And I was like, okay, let's
He's
let's
also
run
the
with
one who
that.
said he wanted to have a choice in it.
Yeah.
And it was actually only near the end of a development where we actually said, hey, because normally when you started the game, you picked your trait immediately.
Yeah.
And then eventually said, why don't we just move the trait
Austin
choice?
fought so hard to move it into a song, and it was a huge pain in the ass, and it worked out really well. But yeah, there came a point where it just wasn't working. And Montaigne had been writing the love songs, and they were killing it. Like absolutely destroying it. And so I was like, maybe we have some extra money and we could get them to consult on this.
Decided that we'd played If Only, the Freddie love song for the team, and had just about half the team in tears, literal tears, in the office, broken down. And I'm like, maybe we should get them to write the drift, because they seem to be pretty good at it.
When you say that you're going back and forth with Austin, is that sound clips? Is that text?
It's everything. It's like sound clips, it's text, it's hey, here's a random YouTube video that like I'm thinking about this idea, like what about that?
Little wave files of Liam singing.
Oh, God.
Like for example, clip 8, which we could play now if that's all right.
Have I lost the way, adrift without fate? These failed expectations, what awaits.
Hey, yo. And then they're going to finals. Oh, God.
I was always so much happier when it was Liam who was sending the waves, as opposed to when every time I'd have to send something, it's like, please forgive me. And I would say.
How do you feel that Montaigne as a songwriter sort of adapted or changed?
So basically, like they took what we had, and our request was the worst possible request you could give to an artist, which I know that Ben is deeply familiar with, which is effectively make it pop. And we basically sent it to them and said, like, look, the idea is there, but it needs to be more lyrical. Like, it needs to be more interesting and emotive. And they were like, I think I can do that. And I think they went away for a couple of days and then sent it back. And that's when, like, a boat lost at sea.
It was pretty close to what we shipped with, actually.
Yeah.
There was some tweaking after that point. And I think there were also tweaks once the Cinematics team was. We were making the actual composition of it, because it was a song that we had to split into two, because Calliope appears in the middle of it, and then we have the second half. But what Montaigne sent back first was, like, especially the beginning of it, pretty much it.
I just remember like hearing it, and then every time one of my lines made it in, I was like, yes.
We actually have a clip of Montaigne performing Adrift to cue up now. That's clip 9.
Ask me everything I set upon, it rebels at my feet. Everything I've learned, wasted on a girl who doesn't know how to be free. Like a boat lost at sea, with no sails, not a breeze. I'm drifting
It's so wild how incredibly like emotive and rich their voice is, and they're just hanging out in their house in a Snoopy
Laura
shirt.
was
Like-
so intimidated in the first session, hearing the scratch, Bontaine scratch, and it was like, "Why do you want me to do this exactly?" Because I don't know who they are, but they seem really good.
And I think it was really interesting because we were concerned that if we gave this to a voice actress, that they wouldn't be able to deliver on the performance of it because Montaigne was so good and their control and mastery of their instrument is
Parts of the songs
exceptional.
where they would do this sort of little voice,
They would do lilts
little
and
dip
they would
in the and sometimes we would have to take those out.
Yeah.
Because
And-
we'd listen to them in the booth, or Laura or whoever it was would be like, I can't do that.
Yeah. But I think with Adrift, it was one of the things that really assuaged our fears because Laura took it, and I remember listening in the session when she did it, and we cried. Like, both of us cried because it was so raw, and she brought such a performance. Like, she brought it to life. Like, Montaigne's version
We were never
is-
not going to cry.
That's true.
There's the songs have gone through 3 different births for us, right? From scratch to the VO performance, and then when we heard the songs being played by the orchestra.
Oh God, yeah,
So,
that was
yeah.
wild.
But, yeah, the very first session, Liam, you were there. Were you there for that entire
Yeah.
thing? Yeah. That was really. Laura was so concerned whether she had the range. Austin was like, "No, you're fine." Laura didn't really feel it until we're in the session, and she got into it. I think. Did we start with a drift, or was it?
It was a Challenging a Queen.
Challenging a Queen. We
was
did
the
the
first
kick-ass
one.
path.
And I think
yeah.
it took until like the 4th session.
Yeah, where finally she came in and she's like, actually, you know what? I think I got this. The Challenging a Queen kick-ass, that meant we had to get through the rap part. So I can understand her concern. But yes, once we got into the clever path and we did a drift, and you're seeing it's like there's a combination of talent, which she has in spades, obviously, but also bringing the emotion of the character to the song. Like there's a
Like the acting component of it.
acting component, yes, that is not as easily quantifiable. But when she, as soon as even in the very first session for us, for Liam and I listening to her, we're like,
oh yeah,
this is Grace.
Well, I mean, Montaigne's performance is so gorgeous, and their voice is like so rich, and they sing it like a song, whereas Laura, like, it like kind of moves through her in this way that feels like very, very vulnerable, I think. And her and Ashley also have just like such amazing chemistry. Like they play
Ashley
together so
Johnson. Jesus Christ.
Speaking of the recordings played with orchestra, I thought we might play a clip from the Myth and Magic night you had, which included a live performance of Adrift with Ashley Johnson, Laura Bailey. That's just clip 10. Thanks.
Lost at sea with no sails, not a breeze. I am drifting cold waters, no star to be seen. Is the world too much, or is it just me? Everything I set upon unravels at my feet. Everything I've learned wasted on a girl who doesn't know how to be free. Like a boat lost at sea with no sails, not a breeze. I am drifting cold waters, no star to be seen. I have burned my tongue. Grief from all the promises, too many dreams unsung. All the steps I didn't take and paths proved untrue. Is there any path through? Like a boat lost at sea. Oh, I'm about to with no sails. Not a you still have your life ahead. I am drifting cold waters. No star to be seen. All things that lose their way can find it again. There is no inertia in the ocean. Maybe if I paddle hard enough, I'll fight the waves, try to be tough. Can I belong to the sea? Like a boat lost at sea, with no sails, not a breeze. I am drifting cold waters, no star to be seen.
It's hard looking at that, seeing Calliope there, remembering that for most of our development, she didn't look like that. She had that's a character that went through a visual journey of her own and a story journey, because that was part of the 3/4 rewrite as well, where Calliope needs to be more of a character in this story, be more present. And then Ben had the sort of the mission, is my way. Ben, could you make her just more interesting somehow?
Okay, I'll do my best. No, it was very fascinating. Yeah, like when I was talking about earlier about how initially I had thoughts of it being very like Twin Peaksy in a way, where it would be like Calliope used to be this character who was very like innocent and everyone sort of loved her, and she was just like this beautiful spirit gone too soon kind of thing. Yeah. And then
she was very Ophelia.
Yeah. And so when we had the story change, where she was like, actually, she butt heads with a lot of people. She was very fiery, and sometimes quite difficult. Having to find someone who still filled the space of someone who cared about Grace and who gave this like warm assurance to her, while also being fiercely independent in her design as well.
She had some kick-ass along with the charming.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was a lot of fun to work on.
How was that reflected in the character design?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, initially it was very just like a giant, like a coat that sort of like she was swimming in, a big scarf that sort of covered her up. There was a headband that was golden and had like wreath designs to it as a little, if you know, kind of moment. And she was very sort of just like soft to her design, and it was calming to be around, and very all the sort of the cloth that she wore was kind of very soothing and very like homely, earthy kind of vibes, right? And like the color scheme was like this like sort of khaki and a maroon, sort of very earthy. And then so going from there, I think we started looking to like punk rock aesthetics at first.
Was it? I think I was like, I need somebody who you could imagine being at home in who's the guy just Campbell Soup? The Campbell Soup art.
Yeah.
Warhol. Andy Warhol. And somebody who could be at home sitting there with Andy Warhol and inspiring him. Like somebody who's kind of cool, but not so cool that they seem like they're trying too hard, like has an ease to it. I remember that being my instruction, and that's where you came back with her in the big fluffy coat.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah. Having a sort of a coolness, like she could hang out with Andy Warhol or with rock musicians, and she just would fit into the background of whatever photograph you were seeing, like whether it was in the 70s or whatever, kind of timeless vibe to it. And it took a couple of iterations, but
yeah. I think also another important part was, hold on, where's my point? That's a good one. that was a good one. It was sort of the, you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you
You
mean.
know exactly what I mean?
I think what you might mean is that we have just hit time.
Oh, that's exactly what I meant.
So Saved by the Bell.
David, I think we hit time, actually.
And I'm afraid we are just out of time for audience questions. But luckily, these three and many of the other geniuses behind Stray Gods are turning up all over Melbourne International Games Week. And would you like to shout out any?
We are literally here all week.
We are literally here all week. So this is the first Stray Gods event of the week. I think the next one will be we're doing the closing keynote at Game Connect Asia Pacific, which is the Australian Game Developers Conference. Then on Thursday night at 8 p.m, just around the corner, we're doing a fashion show, which will be really, really cool with clothes inspired by characters from the game, as well as an orchestral performance, I believe. And then on Saturday at 12 p.m. in the main theatre at PAX, we're doing a sort of like secrets retrospective panel with Hex, which will be really, really fun.
Please, everyone, give David, Ben, and Liam a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you, Jenny.